Okay, well, we're going to get started.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone, to this month's episode of Unhoused and Unscripted. I'm here with Stephanie Fields, our Data Systems Administrator at Cocoon House, and we're here to talk about March being Disability Awareness Month and the unique intersection between ableism, disabilities, youth homelessness, and how we see disabilities impacting the young people that we work with. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Stephanie, you've been with Cocoon House for almost
12 years?
almost 12?
Yeah, 12.
12 years, right after I came. We have a lot of institutional knowledge between the two of us.
So true.
It's amazing. I'm really looking forward to this. You serve on our EDI committee, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and you are a staunch champion for improving Cocoon House's focus, our ability to serve those with disabilities, and have been a champion for this work. So that's why when this opportunity came to speak with you, you were the natural candidate to come on in and share with us kind of how you see our youth in the intersection with disabilities. So
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
Excited.
So Stephanie, I want to talk a little bit about the understanding of the intersection with youth and disabilities. Can you talk a little bit about your background and the connection to disability advocacy in your role and how you see that role fitting into the bigger Cocoon House picture?
Yeah. I'm certainly not an expert by any means, but disability is really important to me. I've had a lifelong connection to disability through loved ones when I was growing up, schoolmates. I had a disabling event when I was a kid that significantly changed the trajectory of my life. So disability has kind of been a part of my framework forever. Things came to the surface during the height of the pandemic, of course, as that was a mass disabling event, and it radically shifted the way that we in our culture view disability, hopefully in a good way. And so now it's just really important for me to bring that to the work that we do. And Cocoon House has a long history of working on EDI and focusing on the racism aspect of it and the pride aspect of it. And I think we've been neglecting disability a little bit, and I'm excited for this opportunity and others that are coming to help influence that towards progression.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like as I've been involved with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, it's been something that's brought up more and more frequently, and I feel like it's gaining traction. But as you've said, have done work around anti-racist policies and work within the org, LGBTQ support and allyship, but this idea of how to better support our youth and staff that experience disabilities is something that feels like it's the next evolution of our agency and our work. Um, what do you see as kind of the unique challenges that youth facing homelessness, who are experiencing disabilities? What are those? How are those challenges maybe impacting them more than someone who's not suffering from housing instability?
I think for youth who are experiencing disabilities, they have an unfortunate intersection between ageism and disability. I think our culture doesn't trust youth. They don't believe youth. And so when a youth has symptoms or signs of disability, I think they're uniquely written off as indications of typical youth rebellion. And so they're missed. And so youth are often left to their own devices or forced into rigid boxes and forced to figure out how to navigate life on their own instead of being supported and encouraged and met where they actually are. Anecdotally, I have a ton of friends in high school who struggled that went on to get disability diagnoses in their late 20s and early 30s. And the only thing that changed was their age. They had aged out of the perception of not being reliable about what they were experiencing. I think that's very prevalent in our youth and what they experience.
Yeah, remember doing a project once where I was looking up what are some of the primary causes of youth homelessness and misdiagnosed behavior challenges that are a disability being missed,
Yeah.
or lack of engagement being chalked up to, just not caring and being kind of a delinquent when it might be, dyslexia or just other things that are impacting the youth's ability to be successful in the classroom. And that labeling as problematic child versus a youth that needs additional resources or support, yeah, it kind of sends the youth down a path that is hard to come out of.
Yeah, and I think for our youth in particular, there's a double whammy of disability and trauma being wrapped up to each other, and people not being able to recognize both of those things for what they are and how they influence each other. A super common example would be severe PTSD. That is a disabling condition, and it's going to impact the way that they interact with authority or adults or programs or systems. And it's only seen as it might be seen as trauma. They're responding from their trauma, but they're not recognizing the chronic disability nature of that.
Yeah. When a youth then maybe has or maybe doesn't have a diagnosis of a disability, what types of barriers does it present when trying to access housing or education from an already homeless perspective?
Totally. I think even with a diagnosis, youth run into issues in those arenas. Disability discrimination is prevalent regardless of your age, but particularly when you're young. I think for youth, the particular struggle is that, like I said before, we don't really believe them. We don't think that they're experts of their experiences, and we tell them that they'll change their mind later or they'll think back differently later. But don't um, youth don't fit into molds very well, particularly when they are experiencing disability. And so when a youth shows up to a education program or they show up to a youth housing program, we expect them to fit a mold and to follow instruction and to follow programming that was absolutely not designed with their needs in mind. So, like a really common example of that would be if in a youth housing program, we expect youth to wake up super early. That's going to be difficult for clients who struggle with chronic fatigue, clients who have PTSD and so don't sleep well at night, clients who have chronic illnesses that mean it takes a while for them to get up and going. We don't factor that in when we set the daily schedule. And you see it throughout like expectations about what is success made. Our society's expectations around success are largely ableist, and that definitely shows up in youth. We expect youth to get good grades, graduate high school, get a job, get clean and sober. And I think oftentimes those are inappropriate goals for a client who is struggling with a lot of intersections of marginalization.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about. And just something you said just made me think of just mainstream expectation of getting up early. We know that in, homeless scenarios, oftentimes the nighttime are the most unsafe. Absolutely. And so either youth have been victims of trauma during the night inside of maybe their own households that led to them being homeless, or if on the street, tend to be awake during the nighttime hours due to the need to maintain visible safety and sleep during the day when it's a little bit more
Yeah.
safer.
Yeah.
And so,
Not to mention that, studies have proven that teenagers need to sleep until 10 or noon when they're quote unquote well adjusted. So throw in trauma and disability on top of that.
brains and bodies need time to grow.
Exactly.
So you oversee and interact with a lot of data at Cocoon House, and do you see trends, or do you see like, I guess my question maybe is more, do we track data, do we track disability adequately through the channels that we have in place today?
I think we try to. So we track disability the way that HUD requires us to as a baseline, which categorizes disability in terms of a couple different barriers. On our paperwork, we ask additional questions to help guide case management that gets more specific about the disabilities that they're experiencing. And so we track a good baseline. I think that there's room for improvement in terms of the nuances of disability and the way that we don't really have a system in place right now to track meeting specifically disability needs. So if a client's case management is predominantly focused on getting that diagnosis so that they can get other accommodations in other systems, I don't know that we do. I think there's lots of room for improvement there of documenting that that is the work that we're doing.
I agree. There's definitely room for improvement. How prevalent would you say uh, a disabling condition is documented? I mean, what percentage of?
So about 40% of our clients have some form of disabling condition. What's particularly interesting about that is that it's not skewed towards one particular disability. HUD calls them barriers. Uh, I think it's fascinating that it is so prevalent in our population that they have a disabling condition, but that there is not a specific trend of which one. So our clients are very diverse in their disabilities. Some have developmental disabilities, some have chronic health conditions, some have substance abuse disorders or mental health concerns. And we see it all truly across our population. For context, the CDC released a study that showed in 2022, 25% of adults in America had a disability. So 25% of adults versus 40% of our youth are experiencing some form of disabling condition. I would also hazard that that's underreported.
Yeah. But much more prevalent than you might think, probably due to stigma around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think particularly mental health concerns and developmental disabilities are key items that are written off as rebellious youth behavior. They're not seen for what they really are. And so many youth wouldn't ever consider to call themselves disabled or be curious about if they are disabled because they've been fed a narrative their entire life.
Yeah. That's neat. I want to go a little bit more in on, what do you, I stutter a little more. Do you see ways Cocoon House might have next steps around upping our disability service game and programs? I think each program has different limitations and parameters to operate in, but do you see some natural areas for us to explore as an organization?
Yes, um, I think low hanging fruit, which is something that I wrote down for one of the rapid fire questions of like, what is something simple that you can do, is bring back masking. I think bringing back masking and programming and among staff helps make spaces safer for immunocompromised people. Also, I haven't had the common cold since 2019, and that's been fabulous. In addition, I think there is some low hanging fruit in programs in terms of evaluating their programming. What is our expectation of youth when they're in our spaces? And are those expectations disability informed? Do they account for folks who get overstimulated easily? Are they designed for folks who don't transition between activities well? And are they designed for folks who don't want to just do what they're told if they don't understand why it's important to do that? I have not been in direct service for a very long time, so I don't know where that stands at the moment. I know that's something that we definitely struggled with in the past. We were trying to address, but it's hard because we are a funded organization that has outcomes we need to meet. So we need to explore how do we satisfy requirements in a way that uplifts and empowers youth rather than forces them into boxes. I think there's also low hanging fruit in terms of our physical spaces. Our building could use a lot of work. There are some things that are outside of our control, like how many doors there are, which is a nightmare if you use a walking aid. But we can also address things like no strong perfumes or colognes for those with sensory issues. We can address lighting. We can have clear signage. We can make sure that spaces are open and uncluttered to make navigating there easier. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about where opportunities that require very little effort to change can make a big impact for folks. What are some ways that the community, so thinking outside of Cocoon House as well, as ways that the community can better support youth experiencing disabilities?
Yeah, I think uh, approaching youth with curiosity is probably the biggest first step. Whenever we see a youth engaging in any kind of behavior, we can avoid assuming we know why they're doing that. Even if you have knowledge of a youth's story, that doesn't mean you understand what's going on in the moment. So instead of jumping to assumptions or judgments about why a youth is behaving that way, ask questions and ask questions that elicit engagement rather than yes or no. So instead of, are you okay? Which can be shut down with a yes, you can ask, what do you need in this moment? How can I support you right now? And I think you can do that from your awkward nephew who only plays Fortnite and doesn't talk to you, to the youth in your classroom who acts up all the time, who could be quote unquote acting up for a wide variety of reasons. And if you just took the time to be curious with them about why that is happening, you could discover some neurodivergence. You could discover some instability in their home, but you'll probably help that youth come out of their shell, and you can teach them how to advocate for themselves by asking for what they need.
Hmm. You just referenced neurodivergence, and it's something that I think, at least for me, I've heard used that the term neurodivergent much more frequently in the past few years. And for folks that may not fully understand, like, what's an example of neurodivergence?
Yeah, neurodivergence is things like ADHD or ADD or autism, or folks who have sensory processing disorders. It's akin to uh, using the term BIPOC or people of the global majority. It's people who have a brain that do not work the way that the society assumes a brain works. So it can look a lot of different ways. There's a wide spectrum for every flavor of neurodivergence. And I think we're seeing a big boom of discussion about it right now in the wake of the pandemic. I think kids being chronically online because they had to be in order to engage in school has facilitated them talking to each other more, which allows them to share information and gain access to information, which means they have more words to describe themselves and to say like, hey, I'm not struggling because I'm stupid. I'm struggling because my brain doesn't work the way my brother's does. And it's empowering youth to talk about their experiences, and adults too, in a ways that they haven't had language for before.
So that's a subtle invitation into folks to dig into the term neurodivergence and do some education on learning, because it does feel like it's much more of a prevalent topic of conversation in not just in Cocoon House, but in the community. I see
Totally.
all the time.
Totally.
Um, so we talked a little bit about what Cocoon House can do different, what the community can do. What if there was a systems change, more broader system change needed? What would you advocate?
I would advocate largely for um, the dissolution of diagnosis. I think that our reliance on proof is harmful. Setting criteria that people have to tick boxes for in order to qualify for services and supports is asinine. I think it doesn't serve people, and it will only push people out that aren't quote unquote disabled enough. And also we're really bad at serving people who are quote unquote disabled enough. So if we got rid of the system that says you have to be able to prove that you have to demonstrate that you are disabled in order to get X, Y, and Z, I think that would be a boon for everyone. If people could just ask for what they need and get it to the best of other people's ability, no one would not benefit from that.
Let people be the masters of their own bodies.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. How would you ask listeners to get involved in either raising awareness, being a part of solutions in relation to youth, homelessness, and disability?
Yeah, I think looking for opportunities in your local community to help, whether that's befriending a neighbor that you have maybe meant to talk to but never have before, to getting involved in your school's PTA or getting involved in local government. I really believe in the power of voting on the local small scale. It's how we impact large system changes, and finding volunteer opportunities, getting to know the people in your community, and particularly getting to know our youth who are wonderful and delightful and will improve your life if you take the time to get to know them. And then also educating. Watch some documentaries, read some books, listen to some podcasts. And you don't know what you don't know. And so assume that that is true and that there's something for you to learn out there, and try to find something that will feed that to you in a medium that you can digest and interact with well.
Stephanie, for almost 12 years, I've known you to be incredibly active in personal knowledge and development. And so thank you for bringing that and that challenge to all of us to do better and to be better and to read and educate ourselves. We're going to play a little game. Let's give you a little bit of a rapid fire. And just the first thing that comes to mind, that's what I want you to tell me. And I've never known you to be bashful and not say the first thing that comes to mind. So
Sure.
I think you'll be a natural at that.
Okay.
Some of these are going to be a little bit personal oriented. Some of them will be Cocoon House mission oriented. So whatever, there's no rules on this. Just first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
One word to describe youth resilience.
Misunderstood.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Marriage is like a bridge. Bridges are functional and a little cliche. They help you carry you over troubled water. But it isn't until a bridge is well used and a little bit bruised that it becomes beautiful and a landmark and a historical place.
Well, who told you that?
My father's friend, Jan Walter.
Good. Way to go, Jan. What's a common myth about disabilities that you wish more people understood?
Our bodies don't disable us, society does.
If you could instantly change one policy to help youth with disabilities, what would it be?
See previous comments about disabling requirements of proof.
What's your go-to comfort food?
Freshly baked bread.
Who's someone that inspires you in this work?
Amy Kenny. She wrote a book called My Body is Not a Prayer Request, and she critiques disability and culture within the church, and she is on point, and she's hilarious.
Okay. What's one small action you can take today to make a difference?
Wear a mask.
If you could put up a billboard with one message for the world, what would it say?
Justice is love out loud.
What's the last book you read?
It was Kiss Me in the Coral Lounge by uh, Helen Ellie. It is a collection of 8 essays about her marriage during a pandemic, and it is hilarious. She's a poker tournament champion who also writes. Very funny. Slightly adult content, but hysterical.
Why are youth homeless?
For like a million reasons.
Are we making an impact?
Yes.
What's your evidence of that?
We hear it from the youth directly all the time.
I was at a fundraising event a week or so ago, and it was me and Chris Willis, actually. And being able to hear Chris, who works in finance, talk about to a person that was just genuinely interested in how do you know you're making a difference, and to hear Chris's unscripted response to how we know we make a difference was really brilliant. And it was the stories of young people coming back, how everything we do is prevention of that chronic misdiagnosis, chronic by snowball into chronic homelessness as an adult. We're making impacts all along the way. And our ability to serve youth, in this case, that are experiencing disabilities quickly and effectively will help break those cycles for youth, which is the reason we're all here.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, Stephanie. Do you want to rapid fire any questions for me?
It's an exciting opportunity. What does your disability awareness look like?
Ooh. Well, I think that you're a large part of my raising awareness. And it's really easy for people that are uninformed, and as I've been in the past, into thinking, well, we have a wheelchair ramp, we're good, right? People tend to think we have a parking spot out front, we're checking the boxes. And just like any other evolution of awareness of, racism and homophobia, all the different, it's so complex. And I think being able to listen, being able to be educated by people who have expertise has really helped me, especially around mental health diagnoses, behavioral health challenges that are being problem children in the classroom, if you will, into understanding the why youth might be struggling. And it's much more than meets the eye. And the comments that you make around, we shouldn't have to ask you to fit into a box. We should figure out how to make the environment in which they operate more conducive to their success. Those are all things I feel like I'm continuously learning, but it's through being willing, being committed to growing myself, and then helping enforce that that's the culture we have at Cocoon House.
Yeah.
Hope I answered that okay.
Yeah. What was the last book you read?
Well, I'm gonna read a book.
I didn't ask what your next book is.
The last
Did you see that?
the reason last book I read was called Monkey, and it is a sci-fi spiritual. It's from like the 1700s in China, and I read it in a class in college, and it was like Asian literature, a class that I took, and it was profoundly impactful to me. And so I recently bought it on Amazon and reread it with my daughter because it's super cool.
Awesome. Now you tell me about the next book.
It's called Reviving Ophelia, and it's about adolescent females' journey to find self.
Cool.
I got daughters, so that's an important book to read.
What is something you want your daughters to know about disability and homelessness?
I think the one of the things I love about my daughters and is their pride in the work that I get to do, and they share about Cocoon House with their friends, and there's a curiosity. First of all, I'll say my children, and I think children in general, are growing up much more informed than my generation on how to be flexible, how to be supportive of other youth. It feels like young people today are just more worldly wise than maybe I was in my generation.
Thanks, TikTok.
Yeah. So I think that I've had really, I would say, higher level discussions around homelessness, racism, disabilities with my kids than I ever would have been able to have at their age. And so where I'm proud of just the level of content that we can discuss, and that translates into all areas of ability and disability. I can't say that I've had like specific conversations with them. However, my son has one of his best friends has had a physical disability his entire life, and watching my son care for, learn, advocate for his friend has really been something pretty beautiful to watch. Yeah, so yeah.
What's your billboard message? I could continue grilling him indefinitely.
My billboard message.
Yeah.
What was yours again?
Justice is love out loud.
Justice is love out loud. That's mine too.
That's underwhelming.
I think find a way. And I think in a world that we have so many things polarizing us and working, against each other, like there's got to be, like, you have to find a way to move forward. And I think of that in like the political landscape. I think of that in the social landscape. You have to find a way to like do the right thing, do good.
Yeah.
Not get beat down. Eternal optimism.
Amen.
So, Stephanie, I think key takeaways for me, one, the issue of disability is far more prevalent in all communities, but especially in youth communities than I think most people understand.
Absolutely.
And as Cocoon House is on this journey to really serve the young people in our communities that have needs, we see opportunity, and you've helped honestly bring a lot of that opportunity to light of how we can do better by our young folks that are experiencing disabilities. I think the call to action here is to educate ourselves and for the community at large to be educated on the complexities of not just youth homelessness, but youth that are experiencing disabilities. So I just want to thank you for your insights, and I really appreciate your view, and want to thank you for the contribution that you continue to make through our EDI committee on raising awareness of disabilities. And March is Disability Awareness Month. July is Disability Pride Month.
Yes.
And so we will be highlighting opportunities for the staff, the youth, and for the community to, move the needle a little bit in this space.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts that you want to share? Anything I missed in the popcorn or things that you think are important for folks to know?
I don't think so. Well, I guess one thing you briefly mentioned, ticking the box of like, there's an elevator or there's a ramp. So I would love for people to explore the gulf between ADA compliance and actually being disability friendly.
Beautiful. I like that.
Yeah.
ADA compliance is so often seen, in my opinion, as this box that has to be checked.
Well, legally it has to be checked.
Right, but it's viewed as, let's just check the box. Right?
Yeah.
Like you're constructing a facility, you're opening any business. There are certain measurements of compliance that you have to meet, but rarely do folks look at, how do I add value to the people walking through my door?
Yeah, I think also the ADA is not consistently applied. Many businesses successfully open new buildings and new locations that are not technically ADA compliant, and there's very little follow through on enforcing those. But further, I think there's a misconception that ADA compliance is meeting needs. An example would be our facility, the doorways are wide enough for a wheelchair to go through, but most of our doors don't have an automated switch to open the door for them. And so while ADA compliant in terms of door width, it is meaningless in terms of a wheelchair user actually being in our facility. Not to come in hot on our actual property, but
it's an example.
Handedly.
It's a prime example.
Yeah.
We'll never say like Cocoon House has this all figured out. Like, this is something that we as an organization are continuing to grow in.
Yeah.
You need to look at where do we present barriers, intentional or unintentional?
Yeah.
How do we work through that to better serve the community?
Yeah, and keeping in mind that accommodating the largest set of disability will be the most welcoming, right? If your facility, for example, has low-grade ramps and no stairs and wide doorways, that helps people with wheelchairs, but it also helps people with walkers and canes. And it also helps toddlers that don't have legs long enough yet to go up a flight of stairs. So by accommodating the greatest need, you're literally helping everybody along the way.
Yeah. And we see that in a lot of different areas, right? But
Absolutely.
out here too.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Stephanie, thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Stephanie Fields, Data Systems Administrator. Thank you. Thank you, folks, for tuning in to Unhoused and Unscripted, and we will see you on the next episode. Goodbye.